About 30 years ago, in the 90s in Germany, my mom started knitting this sweater. I've decided that today, I'm going to finish it for her. Why don't we begin by seeing what exactly we have in this pile, why my mom stopped knitting at it 30 years ago, and maybe if we have any chance of finishing it as well. After laying out all of the different pieces, I noticed that we have a front panel and two sleeves. At least I think it's the front panel. There is no pattern that survived together with the knit pieces and the yarn that I have. So at this point, it is my best guess that it's a front panel that was knit, because usually front panels of sweaters have patterns on them versus the back tend to more often be plain knit. The yarn is one that I've never heard of before, but it is from Germany, like I said, from about the 90s, as best as she can remember from talking with her. And it is a mercerized cotton. I always love the name for cotton in German. It's Baumwolle, which literally means tree wool or plant wool. So like cotton, right? It's a plant's form of wool. But it does sometimes confuse me because I see Wolle and I'm like, oh, it's wool, but no, it's Baumwolle. It is a very rich black color, which usually if I'm knitting something out of cotton, I would choose lighter colors for summer knits, but I kind of like it. This kind of pushes me out of what I would usually choose knitting on someone else's projects, and especially knitting for my mom, because we do have different tastes. So it's kind of fun to work on something that is different. It's also from like 30 years ago, so styles have changed, but this is still very much a style and construction that I like and I want to work on. My first question is, do we have enough wool to finish a back panel? And my best guess would be that to knit the back panel, you would need just about the same amount of wool as the front panel. And I'm hoping that, basically we have 3 out of the 4 pieces that we need to finish a sweater. So in order to finish the sweater, I need to knit the back panel and I need to sew everything together. So I need at least enough wool for the back panel, and then I could maybe make some like sewing thread work or different yarn work to sew things together. In order to determine this, I decided to weigh the back panel and see how much yarn was used in grams. And it ended up being just under 150 grams. I was crossing my fingers that each ball of wool that I still had was about 50 grams, because I have just about 3 balls of wool, which would mean that I would have 150 grams of wool, which would be just enough to knit the back panel. And after looking at the tag and then double checking by weighing them, it does look like we might be able to just eke this one out. The next thing that I'm pretty pleased about is that my mom did save her original knitting needles that she was knitting this on together with the project, so I didn't have to guess as to what needle size to use. I did have a little bit of a confusion because there was some knitting started on that set of needles and it looked like it was going to be more cable work, but it didn't match up with either sleeve length at the start or at the finish, and it didn't match up with the width of the panel that was already knit for the front. So I'm not 100% sure what that might have been. And my guess is it could have maybe been some sort of collar finish. Maybe it was like a rollover collar at the top, something like that. And after looking at this and after talking to my mom, it turns out that there's around 2 reasons why she stopped knitting on this sweater. So the first reason that she told me is that she realized that she wouldn't have enough yarn anymore. And that is like pretty strong in her memory as to why she couldn't finish this sweater. And I remember talking with her again after I weighed the panel that was already knit and the remaining yarn and saying like, I think you have just enough to knit another panel. And I think that what it turns out is that there might have been some sort of collar, which was what was on her needles, that would take up maybe like 1 ball of yarn or a half ball of yarn, and then there wouldn't be enough to make the matching back panel. So that makes sense. So I think I'm just gonna throw the idea of a collar out the window. We're just gonna do a roll collar, maybe finish it with a crochet edging if we have enough left over, who knows? But as long as we have like a finished piece, I think that's generally okay. The next step in re-knitting or trying to finish this sweater is I'm basically going to try to recreate the front panel, but without the cable work. I also sat down and I counted out all of the stitches and the row counts for the front panel piece to see if I can recreate it, but most importantly, I made a gauge swatch. I will admit to not being great about knitting gauge swatches. I am not always the best about doing it. In my defense, I tend to use very, very similar yarns when I knit by hand, and I tend to do vintage pieces. And if I know the yarns well, and I know the general stitch per inch is very, very similar across all the vintage patterns, I feel like once I've done one gauge swatch and I've knit a few sweaters that way, I kind of know what needle size I need to use in order to hit appropriate gauge. But this is new needles for me, this is a different yarn for me, so a gauge swatch was very important. One thing that I did notice is that my mom, at least at this point, was knitting quite tight. When I took the old project off of the needles that she had on there, that I think that bit of collar that she had on there, it was very, very tight on the needles. And when I knit my gauge swatch, it was a lot looser. I'm not trying to have holes in this project, but I also don't really want to wrestle with my needles on and the yarn. So I'm just gonna knit, I'm gonna knit tighter than I usually do, but not so tight, right? And so my gauge swatch ended up being that I need to cast on fewer stitches and I need to knit fewer rows. So hopefully that also helps a little bit in the yarn usage, and it's also the back of the sweater, so if it ends up being a little bit more loose or open knit, hopefully it's not quite as revealing maybe, or see-through as if it were the front of the sweater that was a little bit looser in the knitting. But I'm really excited. I think I have all the pieces that I need now. I have the gauge swatch, I've counted out all of the pattern stitches and adjusted it for the gauge that I'm going to be knitting at. So now I am going to go ahead and cast on for this project and see how far we got to go. Basically, it's just a plain knit, right? So I just cast on and I knit until we reach the underarms and then we cast off. So I guess I'll see you when I have made a little progress on knitting the back panel of this sweater. I'm so excited. We have made some progress on this back panel, and honestly, black yarn is really unforgiving. In person and on camera, knitting with black yarn it is so hard to count stitches and to see exactly what you're doing. And it is so hard for the camera to pick up what is going on. Let me see if I can, yeah, it's tough. But I believe we are now the same length here as we are from the cast on edge on the front panel to the underarms. It does curl up a little bit because this is all stockinette and stockinette curls, but I think if you kind of compare it, it is very similar. On the original, 5 stitches are cast off for the underarm and then the length of the armhole is knit. I'm not sure if I should go for 5 or for 4. I might hold up the 2 pieces and kind of compare them and see what the right number of stitches to cast off for the underarm is. But honestly, this is really easy. Like I said, it's very rectangular, very square. We're not doing a whole bunch of shaping, you know, from the waist to the underarm and then making sure that the underarm has like a slope. It's boxy, so thankfully it's not too bad. But yeah, now I'm gonna go ahead and cast off for the sleeves or the sleeve holes and then continue knitting for the length of the underarms. I am crossing my fingers that things continue to go smoothly. Oh, update on yarn amounts. I have started the second ball of yarn. So I've used 1 full ball of yarn and I'm like maybe a quarter of the way through the next one. And I have 1 ball of yarn left after that. So I have my fingers crossed that we're going to have enough wool to finish this and maybe even sew everything together. And then like really stretching it will be potentially doing like a crocheted edge around the neckline or something like that. That would be, or around the bottom, something like that. And then we can also get to the second reason why I think my mom gave up the knitting on this sweater 30 years ago. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep knitting and I will see you if there are any updates in the meantime. Okay, so it's a little bit later. I have knit a little bit further and we are getting close to the back shoulder shaping section. If I wanted to do shoulder shaping to match the front portion. And I don't know if I can explain this to you really, really well. We are looking pretty okay, fingers crossed, in terms of yarn usage, but I want to try to explain the shoulder shaping to you a little bit better. So let me see if I can't grab something to try to explain this to you a little bit better on the decision and what I'm currently looking at to see what I'm talking about. Hold on one second. We're gonna probably have to jump forward a little bit, and I'm gonna try to explain this to you a little bit better. I decided to look at some of my other vintage sweaters that are knit in pieces, and something that you might notice often also in sweaters that you own is when you lay them flat on the ground, you can see the back, or like the inside, and then the front neckline scoops down. So I decided to do no shoulder shaping. I was just gonna knit the full length of the front panel and not do like a cutout for the neck and just go all the way up, because that I think will match the overall shape or design of a lot of other sweaters that I've seen. So at this point, now that we have all the panels done, we've just got to sew it together. And usually how I sew it together is I do it in the way that I kind of learned from reverse engineering commercially knit sweaters. So you start with the shoulders at the top, then you sew in the sleeves, and then you sew from the wrist all the way to the underarms, all the way down to the waist. All right, it's quite a bit later, but I have sewn the shoulder seams of the sweater. Now what we need to do to finish it are set in the sleeves. Basically, it's not fully slitting in sleeves because you don't have a formed armhole that you're trying to put a sleeve into. But remember how we were talking about that there's two reasons that I believe that my mom did not finish this sweater. The first being that we were very, very close to running out of yarn, but we finished it with still this much yarn left over, so that's a really good sign. The back panel, I mean. But the second bit is the setting in of the sleeves. I don't find setting in sleeves ever very easy, but these sleeves in particular do not line up very nicely. So I have managed to pin one in place. I'm about to sew it, but I will lay out the second one on the ground and hopefully you can see a little bit what I'm talking about. So the sleeve itself is on the bit that you have to sew onto the body of the sweater is very triangular. And then where you're sewing into on the body is very square. So there's a lot of extra fabric on the sleeve that you have to ease into the arm side that you're trying to set it into place to. So I would say that typically some patterns aren't, like this is a challenging sleeve to set in, even with this easier technique that I learned. We're not fully setting in a sleeve. So this isn't a pattern that I would recommend. I don't even know what the pattern is. So I guess that's a good thing that we can't recommend it because this one is tough to set in. They are just not matching up very nicely. But I'm going to keep on setting the sleeves, and then from the sleeves I'm going to sew up the side seams like I was talking about. And then the sweater will be finished and I will show you the final reveal. I have no idea what this is going to look like. This is a shape I don't understand and a style of sleeve that is very strange to me. So this is all very, very new to me. I can't wait to see what this actually looks like. I was expecting a boxy fit. I really had to ease the sleeves into this sweater for it to fit. And I used kind of a 1940s technique that I know in order to do it at the top, but it definitely is a very, like I feel like a big square up top. So this isn't maybe necessarily a sweater style that I would personally choose. This is again an interpretation of what it might have been because I didn't actually find the original pattern that my mom was knitting off of. The sleeves are also just a hair short for me. I'm taller than my mom by like a good 6 inches, 5-6 inches maybe. So I think this length and size might fit better on her. So I'll probably be giving this sweater back to her for her to wear if she would like it. But I'm just so excited to have finished this piece and kind of have detective worked out how this worked. I can understand maybe why she stopped. Finishing sleeves and setting in sleeves are not easy. It would have been easier though if I had a working linker. If you haven't seen me used my linker before. I think I have it in one video where I'm knitting a cashmere sweater. It is the way that even manufactured sweaters nowadays, any sweater that you find that has chain stitching to close the seams, are using a industrial form of this exact same linker that I'm using. I've been to knitting factories and that's exactly what they use. But the one that I have is meant for like lace weight to maybe DK sport weight yarn, definitely not the thickness of this yarn. So that took me forever to sew together. I've actually formed new calluses on my fingers from sewing this together because the yarn is just so thick and sturdy. So that I wouldn't say was the most pleasant experience. But I don't know, it feels so good to finish a piece. We have a work in progress, a whip, a UFO that's probably around 30 to 40 years old, and we finished it. I don't know. I'm so excited. I think that's great. I'm very happy about it. I have a few more unfinished projects that other people have started, not from my mom. These other ones that I've collected are from strangers from the 40s and 50s. So if you enjoy watching me finish other people's work, especially if we don't have a pattern involved, so we're doing some sleuthing and we don't find out what it looks like until we're actually done with a piece, please let me know and I can make more like this. Thank you so much for watching. I know that we all have limited time, so I appreciate that you decided to spend some of it with me. If you enjoyed a video like this, then maybe you'll like one that's up here as well, and I will see you all again very, very soon. Bye!